Okay. So this lecture will be recorded, if you don't mind, and then it will be available to not to everyone, but to the select few, mostly to people who come here, and also the Carriage Drivers Association in Latvia are very interested to have it, and maybe to visit it later, to kind of watch with those members who couldn't come today, who don't speak English that well. So this is the first event in our series of virtual events in equestrian history. It's hosted by the Latvian Academy of Sport Education, and we are supported by the publisher of the event and the new journal. Sharon, the journal is the Journal of Equine and Equestrian History. So we started this series last year, and then people were interested in having a kind of second season. So Kathleen very generously agreed to share her expertise in carriage driving and its history. So Kathleen, do I need to introduce you, or do you want to do introductions yourself?
I can do my introduction. So my name is Kathleen Haak, and I greatly appreciate you inviting me to be here today. I have been driving for about 20 years. I have my CAA level 2 driver proficiency, and I've been very interested in carriage driving as a whole and carriage driving history for quite a long time. Really gotten into it the last 12 years or so. And I'm very fortunate to be in Lexington, Kentucky today to talk to you. On my one hand, I have a harness that's over 100 years old, and on the other side, I have the World Coaching Club headquarters. So it's very inspirational to be able to bring this to you from Lexington, Kentucky. Now, as we talk about the history of modern carriage driving, of course, we have to define what is modern carriage driving. And that really depends on the organization that you're talking about. Generally speaking, things that are modern are built after the First World War. Some of the British vehicles, they consider them modern if they were built after the Second World War. But for this particular talk, we're going to be dealing with after the First World War, which this is a combined driving vehicle, and they haven't come along until the 1960s. So this is a very modern vehicle, but it has its roots in the past, as with most things, because without the history of the wheel and springs and all these other things, we wouldn't get where we are today. And these modern activities that we do today include pleasure driving, which we just go out and drive for just to enjoy nature, combined driving, like we just saw, showing, which is doing things like here we have a cones class. Sometimes it means things like going just around the show ring and being judged. And then we have coaching, which is when they take out the larger vehicles, the coaches, the brakes, and enjoy that with friends. So there's a lot of different things that we do in modern carriage driving that harkens back to the days of old. Now, I was specifically asked to include some of the things from the England, the UK, and that always gets a little tricky because carriage driving in England actually was fairly late. And they really enjoy coaching and things like that, but it doesn't come along until quite a bit later than other things. So early carriage development is in other countries. For example, in Italy and Germany, the House of Thurn and Taxis was organized a postal system in Italy by 1450. And so they had vehicles going all over the place across different countries, and it was not unusual for that to happen at that time. This is the postal system that most of us, that today's postal service is based off from. But the first coach made it to England roughly the 1500s. The first one was thought to have been supplied by Walter Ripon to the Earl of Rutland in 1555. The first coach for Elizabeth I was commissioned in 1564. She opened Parliament with it in 1571. And we very nicely know this because of all the drawings. And we know that this vehicle was very heavy, it was square, it was suspended by leather straps, and probably was not a smooth ride. Now, was it smoother than being carried or riding a horse? Well, it depends on what your thoughts are on that. But it was really thought to be a vehicle that ladies were in, and basically not something that the gentleman drove in. As the vehicles come to England, there are things happening that make it successful. One, we have a monarchy. Monarchies usually mean money and power, prestige. And so whatever the monarchy is doing, that's what other people want to copy. And in this case, the coaches that were procured for Elizabeth I and other royals, after they had them for a few years, they sold them, bought new ones, and sold them down the line. So they essentially had used vehicles out there. And people that were a little bit lower in the caste system bought them and used them to drive around, and actually they would hire out. And so by 1650, we actually have the first traffic jams. And they were really not really welcomed in London and England in general because there wasn't enough space in the roads. And this is one of those times where natural disasters help us out, because there was a huge fire, and of course London was rebuilt, and so therefore there was space for these carriages and for vehicles to go through, and that helps things in general. But I always find it interesting that by 1650 we have traffic jams. It doesn't take us long to get that way. So in 1660s, during the reign of King Charles I, it became aware that we needed some unification. And of course, the wheelwrights making the wheel led the movement, thinking that there was a need for improvement, a need to bring people together to set certain standards. And so in 1663, the Royal Society of London forms a special committee to improve gigs. Now, gigs in general are any two-wheeled vehicle, but now today it means a little something different. It looks something more like the bottom photo, whereas in the early days, the photo that's on top is much more what you would have seen. So they said, okay, we need to get some unification. We already have hundreds of carriage makers, and at this point, everyone is using a different system, or you may see what your neighbor's doing and you may steal that idea, or you may just do something completely on your own. There's no quality control, no checks at all on what people are doing. And the many frauds and deceptions were noted by the wheelwrights and coach makers, who decided that they needed to teach these young people and basically come up with an appointment system, internships and things like that, so that they could make things happen. And the study that they did, and they interviewed all of the coach makers that they could find, they said, well, there's some things that are very similar. And so they took this vehicle and they basically took it apart, and they said, all of these pieces are on every vehicle. All vehicles have wheels. All two-wheel vehicles have shafts. All of them have a seat. So we should be able to measure these things and be able to make them uniform. But there's different things that come into play, because we have to think about the height of the horse, the size of the people, and how many people you're putting in there, and the size of the wheels, because we have line of draft, which is the line that the animal is pulling from. We also have to consider things like that. So what they did was they decided that, okay, we're going to decide what the point of the shoulder is, and we're going to figure this out for the different size horses. And so they decided on what type of length of shaft we have, angle of the line when it's loaded versus when it's just sitting empty. And they decided what would be the most optimal choices for legs for humans. And so they figure all this out, and they figure out where a person needs to sit on a carriage to have that seat center line and make the carriage the most balanced. It's not to say that you don't have to balance them a little bit on your own, but this is the optimal. And so then they think, well, we have to then take a look at the horse. One of the things that happens at this period of time is that they are breeding horses specifically for driving. And most horses, not all, but most horses could do double duty. And they wanted horses to look a certain way to go with certain vehicles. So they started taking what is the optimal, which is for this period is right around 15.2. That's what everything is kind of related to. And they said, okay, if we do that, we need to know how this horse is going to pull. What is the optimal line for that? And so they started working off the shoulder, and they came up with all these ideas about what you need if you were going on a low resistance surface, which would be a road in good weather, what you were going over if you were on a rough surface. Because if you're pulling a gig, which is a straight line and it's for city driving, or if you were pulling a farm wagon with full of produce, those would have two different types of weights and surfaces and things like that. So they did take that into consideration, and they came up with these optimal angles. And again, this all comes into play with things that we're doing now. They thought, well, we're not done yet. We need to figure out the wheel and what's happening with the wheel and where we should place the wheel to have it all be optimal. Now, they again are taking into consideration what they already learned from the carriage and from the horse, and they applied it here. And so we get these trace angles that we just talked about, and they start thinking about, again, whether the surface they're going on is hard or soft, and figure out the optimal angles for draft for rolling wheels. Now, at this point in time, they're all pretty much solid iron or wooden wheels. They do have traction in the form of, they would put essentially a spike nail into them, and that would put traction on. They don't have anything else. And you can figure that out. Different cities had different laws about how much traction you could have, because that, of course, tears up the road. But we're not going to worry about that right now. They're just talking about, in general, if I have this round wheel that's going around, what can I do? And this is what they come up with. Okay. And it's somewhat complicated. The top line is the height of the horse. And in this case, everything is in imperial, has been translated in imperial for this. And that means 1 hand equals 4 inches, which equals 10.16 centimeters. So if the height of the driver is 6 feet tall, then optimal seat for him, in theory, is 20 inches. And so the same thing, the height of the seat board is 14 inches. And so they figure these things out, and you start getting uniformity. And this makes it easier for the horses to work. It makes people like their vehicles better. And this is the way that they continue on for quite some time. Now, in 1880s, they start figuring out how to mass produce carriages. And up until this point, they figure these things out as far as, if you come in to Brewster, who made some of the best vehicles in the world, and they would measure not only you, but the horse, and, customize it a little bit. In the 1880s, they were saying, okay, we're just going to put out these vehicles, and we're going to go for, the average man is, let's say, 5'9", and the average horse is 15.2, and that's what we're going to make. And we will offer pony size, or offer horse and pony size, and sometimes draft size. And that's what we're going to do. And so they went back through it, and they took the studies that were done in the 1660s and said, okay, this is still valid. This information, maybe we want to change it just a little bit here and there, but it's still pretty valid. And then just within the last 40 years, Dr. Gordon Cantle came through, and he is an engineer and verified all this information again during the 1970s, and just made sure that, this stuff works. And it still does. And so today, this is the common chart that's given out to people who are looking to buy vehicles. It is a suggestion, it's where you start. But this information is very solid. And if you're looking at a traditional vehicle, this will get you started. So all the way back from 1660s to today, we still use this information. And it doesn't make a difference what country you go to. If you're looking at a two-wheel vehicle, this should get you started. The only change is with the very, very modern vehicles in the last 10 years or so, they've started making adjustable shafts, and they are very much able to move the length of those, and they come to the middle of the horse. And so the shaft length isn't as important, but keeping the information is. So this is basically where they started. Let's figure out how to make this vehicle in the most efficient way possible. They thought, well, we've started on this research path, we should continue on. And so they started in 1664 to 66. The Royal Society of London investigated springs, and they really wanted to figure out how to take the burden from the horse. If you've been in a vehicle without springs, a lot of times you get the shuck, which is back and forth, or you get the bob, which gives you seasickness. And it's not a real comfortable way to travel. So they started figuring out the springs, and the elbow springs are some of the earliest. There are a few springs before that, but we don't really see them. There's not very many examples of them left. S springs were next. Whip springs, C springs, all that type of thing are the very early ones. And we still use C springs today. So again, this is something that hangs around and is with us for a very long time. We have a couple examples. This is a whip spring. This particular vehicle, I believe, is from the 1760s. It's out of Felton's Carriage's book. And you can see that this is the suspension right here. And so you've got this, it's a much easier ride. You're not directly on the shafts where the horse, every step the horse takes is you're feeling it. So it's a step forward. And then this is a C spring. And at the time that this vehicle was made, it was considered quite the luxury vehicle. The thing that happens, though, is sometimes you're so blown away by what is happening with the rest of the carriage that you don't really see the springs. And hopefully you can see my mouse right there, but this is the C spring right here. And so you don't have to worry so much about all this stuff up here because that's not important. This is your C spring. Now, as we look at this vehicle in the middle, it's the same vehicle. And again, you can see the C spring right there. It looks like a C, but this case right in front of it, that is a sword case or a pistol case, and you can access it from inside the carriage. And so that was for your protection. And then this is the back picture here. And you can see this is a pretty elaborate vehicle. This right here, the step, it has a cover on it, and it's very nice. And then even on the back where the groom gets up, you have a very elaborate, very nice step. So that's an example of a C spring. And we have another one here as well. And you can see, again, this is not quite as ornate, but you can see the spring. Often the C springs are hidden on some of these vehicles, and they're hidden by the hammer cloth that the groom sits on, the coachman sits on. So you can see that on this particular vehicle. So if you're not consciously looking for springs, sometimes it's easy to miss them. But once you start looking for them, they're everywhere. This is a vehicle that we saw just a few weeks ago at a horse show. This is Dennett Springs, and this is a 1911 well-bottom vehicle, and it was actually made in Ireland and has been lovingly restored. But this is a very, very smooth ride. These are a little bit older spring or newer springs. So again, they're improving as they go along based on this information that they collected in the 1660s. And then we get into the 1800s, where again, we start seeing this explosion of information. And that happens because people are going to expos and to world fairs and learn, just really sharing information. One of the things that happens when we talk about carriage driving in England is that because England was the empire that it was, information is flowing back and forth to that little island, and they learn about the best coach making and carriage making techniques. And it's flow, that's how the information is flowing. It's in, and so they're being able to bring things in. Around this time, when the United States comes into carriage driving, we have better wood. We had lighter, durable wood, particularly for wheels, and we exported a tremendous amount of wood and wooden wheels to other parts of the world because they could stand up to things, and they were just lighter. And you can look at this particular vehicle and you can see that by 1872, well, this is not an 1872, but this particular vehicle has very light wheels, but they're very durable. I should not say that this is the 1872. This is a early 1900s vehicle, but you get the idea. In 1872, Brewster, which again was one of the best carriage makers in the country, had these sidebars, and the Brewster hierarchy, the two brothers got in a fight and they split and all this type of thing. This was made by the not so well-known brother, which is James B. Brewster, and he had this sidebar gear. And so these springs run the side in part here, and they support the other springs. During the Regency era, curricles were all the rage, and I just actually had somebody reach out to me about curricles for a movie. And this is an example of a curricle. Curricles have a gig-like appearance, but instead of having shafts, they have a pole, and so they have two horses on them. And they take a little bit more skill to drive. When you get them right, they're really fun and exciting to drive. They're like a sports car. When they're not correctly balanced, or if you have bad horses on them, they're an accident looking to happen. So you either really love it or you're not so much. But this particular one has an example of what happens a lot. This has both C springs and leaf springs. And you can see these leaf springs right here next to the wheel, and then the C springs come up here. So we get that type of thing, and this happens throughout the late 1800s, is where you get these vehicles with multiple spring systems. But it's really comfortable. This vehicle is designed to go out and be at the park. You're putting it on with some high stepping horses, and you look fabulous while you're in it. And the ride should be very smooth. But this is a see and be seen type of vehicle. Today, we use a lot of the elliptical springs. This vehicle was made within the last 10 years. It's actually from Poland, and it is a modern replica of a vehicle with very old references. It's a German hunting type vehicle. But you can see these elliptical springs here. And that's pretty common on today's vehicles, very, very common. But again, all this goes back to the research that they did in the 1660s. Now, one of the other things that happens is that we do get taxes and tolls. And while you may think that, well, how does that have an effect on carriage driving? It does, because people are people, and we don't want to pay any more taxes than we have to. So this is not one that is made from research like the two forces that we just saw. This one is taxes. They made a rule where if you had a vehicle and it costs more than 20 pounds, I think it was. Whoops, I'm sorry. Smooth that. Then 21 pounds. Then you were assessed a tax. So what they did was, at the time, these little four-wheel, this is a dog cart. You could carry an animal in here. It has the luves, which allow the air into the side. They were very popular, and you could go wherever you wanted. It has four wheels. So all of a sudden, you're going to get charged more if you have two wheels or four wheels. So you go to a two-wheel vehicle like we have over here. And they start a process which we still have today, which is that they just put a plain vehicle. So they would sell that vehicle for 20 pounds and a few shillings, and you would not be taxed on this vehicle. However, they would sell you everything else separate. The lamps, a certain type of paint job, the grate that goes in the back for the animals, all these different types of things then became extras, but no tax on it. So this is how they got around it. And this is very common. And there are various examples of it where they change how vehicles are made to fit, to get around tax laws. But it's interesting how that happens. And it still happens today when GM and Ford and everyone makes their different vehicles. The other thing that happens is that we start getting toll roads. Now, in the United States, the toll roads work a little differently, but the whole concept is the same. And this particular one is from 1741, and you can get charged by, the bigger your vehicle is, the more you get charged, which makes sense, right? And it makes a difference whether you have the horse attached to the vehicle or whatever. You can see that for every horse, mule, or ass laden or unladen, but not drawing, it's 1 penny. Okay. For everything else, it's 1 shilling or more, right? So we get vehicles like this. And so this is a tandem cart. We don't typically see it this way. It's a jaunting car. But what they could do was they could put a lot of people on this vehicle. This is also considered an inside car because the people sit in the inside. And they were balanced precariously over the one axle. So 2 wheels, lower toll, and they have this tandem out in front. And so what they would do oftentimes is they would get to the toll road, they would take this front horse off and walk him through, and then they would bring the rest through. So they would pay 1 penny for the first horse, a shilling for the second horse, and they would still have all the horsepower of a 2 pair, but not quite quite as much. This doesn't quite happen today, but I do know of some instances where people were going over borders with vehicles, and there's a story that gets told every time we have a conference about this gentleman that was going into, I believe it was Italy, with a large coach, and they just didn't know what to do with him. So he unhitched his horses, put them in the trailer. They went over the border, and they hitched back up on the other side, and away they went, because the border just had trouble with the horses being hitched. So this is the effect that tolls have. The tandem never really took off. They changed the tolls and such to fix that problem, but it did happen, and the vehicles changed as a result, and particularly with the tolls. So the next thing that we have is the name game. Okay, so throughout history, people want to be associated with a winner. Today, we do it with sneakers. There's a lot of famous people associated with shoes. In this day and age, or in this time of carriage driving, it was about being associated with carriages. So if you were a famous person and you started using a certain type of carriage, your peers would look at that and think, oh, that's lovely, I should have one just like it. And so that happens. The Hansom cab that made that particular gentleman famous. In the case of Lord Brougham, he was a politician and a jurist well before he ever decided to design Broughams. And he had a hard time getting the design exactly how he wanted. The first carriage maker that he worked with did not meet his specifications, so he had a second one do that. And he really worked on getting something that was comfortable to ride in. He was tired of getting these rough rides over rough roads, and so you can see that the springs are on here, and it's designed to take the weight and the bumpiness and just smooth it all out. And so Broughams, we still have Broughams today. They were very famous. It's kind of like saying Xerox instead of a copier. And so, you know, this became a thing. So his friend, D'Orsay, who was a painter and general famous person, he was the Kim Kardashian of his day, let's say, and he wanted to design a vehicle, and it makes sense that they would want similar things. Now, in this vehicle, you can see it's a little bit more rounded than the typical Brougham, and also, excuse me, Broughams don't typically have a perch, and the perch is this vehicle, or is this okay, so we'll just go ahead and keep going. I'm not seeing any notes that say that anything's, there we go. All right. So we can go ahead and, with this particular vehicle, see how things change. And within a 20 to 30 year period, the name D'Orsay really gets applied to 6 or 7 different vehicle types. And they all have this perch. The body changes a little bit. They're very curved, much more rounded than, let's say, the Brougham, but it really undergoes an evolution. And so, but the name stays with it. And so they're using the name to sell this vehicle. And that happens internationally because he had an international reputation. The Brewster Company made D'Orsays. The best companies in England made D'Orsays. Everybody did. And there was scandal attached to his name too. There was all types of things that he did. If you're welcome to look him up. He had quite the interesting life. But it's really interesting how they play the name game with this particular one, and it changes throughout the years. They didn't make them for very long, about maybe 30 years, but definitely a lot of changes as they went along. And so again, we have a name being associated with a vehicle. This is Jenny Lind. She was a famous singer at the time. You may know her from the movie The Greatest Showman. The poor lady never made a dime off from her name being shared, but they put her name on everything, including this vehicle. This is basically a runabout, a very basic vehicle, and they put a canopy on it and called it a Jenny Lind. They also did the same thing with Brewster. Brewster was a very well-known carriage maker, and so they decided to, because they used a lot of green in their paint schemes, there was Brewster green. Brewster themselves never actually used Brewster green, but it became a selling point to have a Brewster green vehicle. And even within the carriage world, Brewster green is not the same for every carriage maker. So it's a really interesting thing about how names get associated with it, and they just try to use them to sell. So along this name game, you have all these people in society that want to be these different things and have this appearance. So carriages throughout the ages have had rules associated with them, and there's rules very early on about who can and can't drive vehicles, and how you drive them and what way you drive them, etc. And we also come up with this deal with how you should dress and how you should behave while you're around carriages. And the rules of civility, they come into play 1685. I think there's some other ones that are even newer, but they talk about how you should get into a carriage. The most important person goes in first, how to greet someone in a carriage, how to help a lady into a carriage, which we can see here. You should help a lady in from the ground, not while you sit into the carriage. And the most important person sits at the offside wheel, so they're the farthest to the back. And then the least important persons sit with their back to the driver. And so, this is things that come into play as we go along. Manners, for some reason, politicians and men are very, very concerned about women in carriages and the scandals that they may get up to. So it was, not considered to be a good thing for a woman to be in one by herself. And that this was the way that people that behaved immorally, women that behaved immorally, may have been transferred around the city, etc. And the same thing is true in sleighs. There was a whole rule about women wearing masks to stay warm when they're out sleigh riding, and that this allowed women of status to go into parts of the city that they should not be in. So that was a great concern. In general, women were not drivers until later on in society. And I say that as in society because we all know that when it comes to farm work and day-to-day merchandising and things like that, if you've got to get your product out there and you got to get your thing done, you go ahead and you drive the horse. In general, though, driving the horse was considered a man's deal. In 1912, this is already changing, late 1800s, beginning of the 1900s. And in 1912, Belle Beach wrote a book about horse riding and driving for women. And society women just lapped it up and thought that it was the greatest thing going. We still use this book today. There's some great comments in it. She was very good at rein handling. And there's been some wonderful women drivers along the way that have learned from her. And now we have a women's coaching club, we have lots of different things, but this all started, in the early 1900s and was driven along by people like Belle Beach. The other thing that happens is that we become very picky about what our grooms and coachmen wear. Now, I'm not going to go into this too deeply because there are entire talks just on what a groom should wear, let alone what a coachman should wear, and in what time period this is, and what type of vehicle it is. In general, we divide the vehicles down into formal vehicles, which are the ones that you take to the park and things like that. You would take them to the opera. You would see sporting vehicles, which are the ones that you go out and go to the country in. And then you also see coaches and things like that. And so each one has its own set of rules that it goes by. And their choices in what you wear. So there's a few things that we can see along this way. This gentleman at the far in the coachman's summer livery, he is dressed for the summer. You can tell he has boots on. The gentleman in the middle is not a coachman, I don't believe. And you can see he has spats on. And they basically are cloth that keep your legs warm. And they're cheaper than getting boots. And the same thing is true with the summer undress. Much lighter coats. The fabric is going to be different. In most cases, not all cases, but most cases, whoever you were working for supplied the livery. And the livery could change based on what that person liked. And the ultimate thing about tradition is that whoever pays the bills gets to pick what you wear or what isn't tradition. So at this point in time, you can see some really bold color choices based on what the lady of the house might like, or what the husband in heraldry may be involved in. There is also a whole line of things that are associated with royalty, and it's a whole topic of discussion in and of itself. So I'm not going to go into that very much. I will say that historically speaking, there is no preference between wearing a gray top hat and a black one. There's a lot of discussion about that as far as whether an owner should wear, what color an owner should wear today. And technically speaking, that didn't come from this era. That came from the Duke of Windsor. We also get trends in coachman. So this is one particular trend. This is J. Piedmont Morgan and Cornelius Vanderbilt being driven. by a 4-up in a sleigh. These are very, very wealthy men. And you may notice that the coachman has a mustache. This was quite the little scandal that they thought that this is actually a painting and this is a photo of a painting. They thought that the painter had made an error, and they were informed otherwise because this is a Hungarian driver. At this point in time, it was very fashionable to have a driver from Hungary, and Hungarian coachmen prided themselves on their mustaches. And so the eyebrows went down because, this was okay. It was acceptable because that was tradition in their country. It's an odd thing what does and doesn't raise eyebrows in the driving world. But apparently at one point in time, mustaches did. Now, when you're going to go driving, particularly back then, there was a lot of difference between the harnesses. And again, this is something that you can talk about for hours. These are 4 different harnesses for very different vehicles. We have the dog cart harness, which is going to be more of a sporting type vehicle. This is one that you take the dogs with you to go hunting. And so, this is a vehicle that, the harness that's pretty basic, not going to have a lot of bling on it because it is going to go out in the country. And you can see that they do have side checks on them. Side checks, overhead checks, those type of things were very common on horses through the 1800s. Basically in 1877, Black Beauty came out, which was a book, and it had a profound effect on how people drove their horses. There was a huge campaign about being able to allow horses to move their heads, etc. And today they don't drive a lot with overhead checks or side checks within the pleasure driving community. That is not necessarily true in the breed community. So if you're going to a breed show, if you're going to show hackneys or something, Arabs or something, you may see these still, but they're a lot looser than they used to be, and they're used to help set the horse's head. Going back to the overall harness, though, you can see quite a few differences in them. The brome on the bottom, this is a horse that's going to go out and be out for business. You want people to know that the vehicle itself is discreet and you can conduct business inside of it. On the outside, you may want people to know that you're in there. And so it's more likely to have a monogram, those type of things. You can also see that the blinkers on the brome are rounded, whereas they're square on the others. And that carries over in tradition to how everything else on the harness is. So you can see on the back pad and everything that it's a little bit more rounded, a little bit not quite as straight and not quite as strict. The keepers on, if you have rounded blinkers, technically speaking, your keepers are going to be a little bit more rounded and not as square. And all the buckles are going to be a little bit more rounded, not as square. So those are just some of the little things that when you start looking at harness that you can see, particularly in the old days. There's not as much tradition in harness today. We have a couple of different harness options and we go with those. But we do ideally choose whether or not you're using the sporting harness or formal harness, that type of thing, to a particular vehicle. So when we're talking about modern turnout, there's a lot of different things happening here. This is Lady Louise driving, I believe this is 2017 at the Royal Windsor Horse Show. This is the vehicle that her grandmother, at that time, Princess Elizabeth, drove at the very first show, Royal Windsor Horse Show, where they were raising money to buy an airplane for the war. So this is a very traditional vehicle. You can see, she's upgraded a little bit to be more modern. And I say that is in that she has on still the traditional hunting green, the hunter green and all that type of thing. But her aprons are very light. They do go farther to the floor. a lot of times aprons are a little bit shorter, particularly back in the day. The apron stayed with the vehicle. Today, we tend to act like it's an accessory for us. But this is a really interesting, nice turnout that has been kept, preserved, and conserved throughout the years. And this is where, if you're going to show at the Royal Windsor Horse Show, this type of vehicle sets the standard. Okay, and it was designed, everything that is at the Royal Windsor Horse Show in England has to be fit the traditional profile of identifiable type to resemble the design of a carriage built prior to the First World War. It can be a modern vehicle. It can be made today, but it has to look like a vehicle that was made in the past. Right now, with the way the economy is, it's very affordable to come to the United States for horse auctions, carriage auctions, and buy a historic or vintage vehicle and take it back over to the UK, have it redone, and it's still very affordable. So here's a couple of different turnouts from England. I'm going to try moving this. Okay. So there's a couple of things that we see here, starting with this pair of chestnut horses. This is a natural wood vehicle, and you can tell the gentleman in question has on a more sporting type of turnout. It's the tweed, and everything kind of matches there. His horses are still impeccably turned out. They're nice. They got a nice spring in their step, etc. The middle vehicle is a little bit more formal. You can see the ladies are in the back. Excuse me, with the first vehicle, it's you can go with or without a groom. In this particular case, it's owner driven. The middle vehicle is designed to only be driven by a coachman. You cannot, or there is no setup for the owner to really purchase, to drive it. And you can see that there's a groom next to them as well. And the ladies would be in the back. This is the space to get in this vehicle is very wide, so it easily accommodates women's skirts. The brake on the far side, a little bit more sporting vehicle. You see a little bit more red, very big lights, lamps on it. And it's a pair vehicle. It's just a little bit heavier. Down in the corner here, we have this little horse that I absolutely love. This horse drives to everything that they put him to, and he's just a really nice show horse. And this is this particular one is for the British Driving Society's Champagne Drive. And so he is turned out very, very smartly, but not formally. So he could be someone that was in business going about their deal. Now, the one thing that you may or may not have noticed is that all of these drivers happen to be holding their reins, the lines, in their left hand. They are driving in that particular style, English coachman style. We don't see that quite as much here in the United States. We tend to drive with our own two-handed style. We are trying to bring the other style back. There's about 5 or 6 different driving styles in the world. We tend to prefer Achenbach here, but any type of one-handed style is what we're trying to teach and preserve as tradition. But for whatever reason in America, we went to the two-handed system, and we stayed there. You'll see everybody, their hands are very involved. We like to do a lot of dressage and that type of thing with these horses, and that is a little bit easier sometimes when you're two-handed. But as you move up the dressage level, you do have to, with driven dressage, you do have to go to a one-handed to be able to do some curves, turns, and things like that to demonstrate reinsmanship. There are 2 natural vehicles on the screen right now, and you'll see that both of these ladies are, even though they're impeccably turned out, it's a little bit more relaxed. The natural vehicles tend to be used more in the country. You don't have to repaint them as much. You may have to just touch up the overall appearance, but it's shellac them and varnish them, but there's no paint to come off. And that was something that was very nice with the country, and so they're that type of vehicle. Wicker is still considered to be a very classy vehicle. You see a lot of wicker vehicles that also associated with children, and again, scuff marks come off from that very easily. If you're looking at something like this vehicle in the middle over here with the Frisian, you have to touch up that little yellow paint very frequently, and if you get into mud, it shows. Now, that said, it is a beautiful, beautiful show vehicle, and it's very nice to see. The vehicle down in the corner with the Mini is a much more modern vehicle. It's designed to look fairly traditional. This is a road cart, and she looks very sharp. We do a lot of red in the United States, not so much in England. They tend to go a little bit darker, I think, in general, but that's not to say that they can't go light. But we like to stand out a lot in the ring. If you have any questions about these, please let me know and we can try to get them a little bit larger for you. You also note that our aprons tend to go all the way to the floor. A lot of aprons in England just cover the knees and things. Aprons were intended to just keep you from getting road dirt and grime on you. Traditionally, also, we drive with brown leather natural reins lines, because that way the dye doesn't get on your hands as you drive. And for that same reason, we tend to wear natural colored gloves, because you're not going to get the dye transfer. In the UK, they have trade classes. Again, this is from the Royal Windsor Horse Show. This is a completely different type of showing than we do often here in the United States. And they are looking for making sure that the turnout is appropriate for the service being provided. So there's always a little bit of variation between these vehicles. I love the fact that this vehicle, the J. Edwards vehicle, says "and daughter." We don't see that very often. And this is a perfumer's vehicle, because you still have to deliver your goods. And this is how they would have gotten around. The vehicle in the middle is a milk wagon, and they're very popular to show in the UK. These type of vehicles were among the first to get rubber tires, because that made them quieter in the morning. Things that they look for on vehicles, the one on the right in green, they're looking to see if you have the bag to be able to give your horse water and feed. Well, we don't do that part in the show ring. Traditionally, would have had to carry water and some type of feed for your horse, particularly if you were doing a lot of deliveries that day, or we're going to be out all day. So you would carry that with you, and that would typically be underneath the vehicle. And then I just love this lineup here of vehicles. The Royal Windsor Horse Show has some of the best trade vehicles that you'll ever see, and I hope that you are able to watch them. They're often online and broadcast, and if not, there's a lot of pictures of them on Facebook. Here in the United States, we have a few trade classes. They're just not vehicles that we see as much. In the heavy horses, the draft horses, we do see a lot of delivery hitches, but they show in a different type area than the light horses do. But they would be delivering things like beer or furniture, that type of thing, very large packages. And they typically don't carry the product with them. So in these cases, if you wanted to go out, with the exception of the funeral vehicle, these vehicles should be have some type of product with them. But the vehicles that we have here in the United States typically do not. And let's see, we should be able to move forward here. Modern coaching. Again, this is one where you can talk for hours and hours about turnout. There's a lot of different details that go into it. It's important to know that there are some things that everybody looks for. You want your horses to look good. There is very common to have one horse that is a different color, particularly a light color, because they would put that on the outside so that you could see it at night. And that would be when you were coming at each other, you would be able to see that white horse or light colored horse. So that's not unusual. The grays, of course, are the Royal Windsor grays, and they're impeccably turned out. There are things like your whip. The reason why the whip is furled is because that whip should be able to reach all the way up to the shoulder of the farthest horse out. Not that they actually truly whip them, but they need to go and be able to reach them if they, in the event of emergency. There are often things that are with them. They usually have champagne. They usually have some type of food with them as part of their turnout. And when they come up the walk, come back from the drive, and they come up through the walk, and they stop and they put down the picnic and do their thing. That's great, and it's a lot of fun. If you ever get a chance to do modern coaching, I highly recommend it. It's just an experience that is like no other. Often they do have someone playing the coach horn, and they would announce when you're coming up to an inn or something like that. So it's very interesting. Lots of tradition and things with this. The biggest thing to remember is that starting even like in the 1870s, coaching was a way to show wealth. And that holds true to get today. You need a lot of grooms, you need very good horses, and those vehicles weigh at least a ton. Which is 2,000 pounds. So it takes a lot of equipment to coach, and that is why they're associated with wealth. Now we have, I think, one more slide. And I know this is all coming at you really fast, but if you have any questions, just let me know. So this is modern combined driving. Okay. Combined driving really came around in the 60s, came to the United States in the early 70s. By 78, we were having championships, things like that. Their rules for this are always changing. So I recommend that before you show, you check with whatever governing body that you might be showing under. Like the FEI is making rule changes even right now, as is the US driving. Helmets are really being pushed for all phases. Combined driving has 3 phases. It's very on par with eventing. So they want to have the driven dressage. They want to have the marathon, and then they want to have cones or obstacles the 3rd day. There are variations on this. We have driving trials now, which take out the marathon phase. The distance is the biggest thing. As farms grow smaller and smaller and we lose a lot of land use, they've had to shorten this up and become more conservative about how this is happening. Now in different parts of Europe, very, very big. And they use downtowns, and there is a lot of support for these competitions. Not so much here in the United States, although they're very fun. They are starting to require a safety vest. Almost all of these wheels are going to be metal. You'll occasionally see something like the pony at the top who may have wooden wheels. And that's perfectly fine. If they have wooden wheels and they're safe, go for it. But they've gone to more of a metal wheel. But again, they're going back to form, and they're going back to tradition. What is it that makes this vehicle work? And so they want things that have a really short turning base. They want to be able to change things up. There are also rules about whether you can use your vehicle You usually use one vehicle for your cones and your driven dressage, and then you use a different vehicle for the marathon, but you can also use it for all three. Judges are just going to score you a little differently. We don't get into the top hats so much here because of it's not formal driving. You can wear everything from a cowboy hat to a helmet. So you see a lot of variation. Again, you see for the Americans, we see a lot of red. We like to stand out. But this came from Prince Philip. So going all the way back to the very beginning of our lecture, we talked about how the monarchy, you know, the prestige and the having the money and everything drove the carriage industry. This modern combined driving came from Prince Philip. He was a great driver. He wrote some books on things, and really drove this sport to happen, and designed some of the first vehicles, etc. That's the type of thing that happens in England. And that's why we go back to England so much for talking about tradition and making sure that we understand what's happening. But each individual organization, each individual country does have their own rules. So if you're going to show, make sure you check the rules that you're showing under. 4-H here in the United States has very different rules than other, you know, the FEI or something like that. So doing very different things. So that concludes our talk. We have an opportunity now for questions, I believe. And I also have some of my resources here. There are very distinct resources for carriage driving. You can find some of them on Google Books. Obviously, I'm using ones that are in English, but there are some out there for other things. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Kathleen. So people can ask questions by raising their hand, unmuting and speaking, obviously, or by writing in the chat, whichever way you want to do it. It's really so much information, so many beautiful carriages as well. Like mind blowing.
And this is very much a snapshot. There is a lot of great big pieces of history that we just kind of skated right over. So I think Judy, yes, they're going to make this talk available, and I will make sure that you get a link to it. Why was the carriage with the ladies riding in it not possible for the owner to drive? So the way that was set up, you know, this is society, ladies, and they don't necessarily drive. They want to chat about whatever is happening. Let's go back to that photo. Maybe. So as you look at this, the driver sits up here, right? Some vehicles are set up so that they have the option of either the groom driving or the ladies driving, the owner driving, and they will have the groom on the back seat. And you do need longer lines for that to happen, if you think that that's going to happen. But in this particular case, if you're looking at the line that your reins come back, if they came back with this setup here up in the front, how this groom is, where the coachman's box is, that would end up where their heads are. They're not going to drive like this. They want to drive like this. And so really, I mean, in the event of a dire emergency, could you get home? Yes, but that would not be the thing to do in this particular vehicle. This particular vehicle is also about being seen. You can see that the faces of the ladies are not impeded. They do have a hood that can go up to keep them out of inclement weather. But this is the type of vehicle that you would go shopping in, or, you know, and I'm talking high-end shopping, not going to the supermarket shopping, or go out to the park. Ladies were highly encouraged to go out and get some air this way. But they did have to have a chaperone, because heaven forbid that they should be out by themselves with just the coachman. Apparently there was a problem with ladies falling in love with the coachman. and that just wrecked many a family, you know. And there was quite a concern about ladies being promiscuous with the coaching. So as far as I know, we had the question about what color the gloves are. As far as I know, they've always been brown. Now we often have a white pair with us, and the white pair are typically of a different material. And I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank right at the moment. And they are used for when it rains. You put them on over your leather gloves, and it helps hold on to the lines. I've not personally seen anybody drive with anything else in the light horse world. That doesn't mean that in the heavy horses they don't do something different. They tend to like a different color line. And I know in different parts of Europe, you'll see white lines, different color harness. And those are different traditions. And so sometimes you get into different cultures, and there's reasons for different lines. But in general, we go with brown so that they match the lines and that there is no dye on anything to be able to hold it. And to my knowledge, I don't ever think I've ever seen a lady take off their gloves. There is a tremendous amount of information about gloves out there, which is, but it's buried in documentation, but I have never seen anything about a lady taking off their gloves. And I'm trying to think back about the last time I seen like Boyd receive the trophy from the Queen, and I don't think that I think he left his gloves on. And you could look at that. There's multiple pictures, but in general, we don't take our gloves off. The idea is this is a horse show. I guess to a certain extent, it depends a little bit on whether you're doing a society event or whatever, but in general, we're there to drive the carriage. And so everything is about the safety and presentation of the vehicles and the horses. And the understanding is that the judge will not interfere with anything that's going to interfere with safety. And taking your gloves off can potentially do that. So I don't believe that they ask you to take your gloves off. All right. Please comment about the color of the driver's gloves. Okay, got that. All right. Is there any other questions? I know this is a lot of information coming at you pretty quickly.
By Agnes. She
Or,
wants to hear and see more about carriage drivers and women's fashion. Okay, so
I'm sorry, what did she? Fashion. I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Well, Agnes wrote in the chat that she would like to hear more about carriage drivers' women's fashion.
Yes. So for women carriage drivers in the modern world, it flexes greatly depending on what you're driving. And so in where you're driving. And right now there's a battle over hats versus helmets. The overall connection is that it needs to be tidy and classy. So, you know, if you're going out, and again, if you're going to like an attelage of tradition or something like that, where you really want to be very in keeping, your vehicle decides what you're going to wear. And so you may, you know, need to be formally dressed. And in that case, you know, it's a jacket. You're going to have to decide whether you're doing a hat or helmet. And the colors are again set by the vehicle that you drive. If you're driving a sporting vehicle like this natural vehicle with the chestnuts, you're going to be in the tweeds. And your color choices are usually brown tweed or green tweed. And so that's how that works. And everything depends on the vehicle that you're driving. And then you put the correct horses, in theory, to the vehicle with the correct harness on, and you dress appropriately to the vehicle. but that's why we talk about, when we talk about carriage driving, the carriages are so important, is because they set the tone for everything else. And realistically, women's fashion, modern women's fashion, tends to be a lot about hats and scarves. We'd like to dress up.
Okay,
Is there
I
any other
have a
questions?
question,
Sure.
and again about color. I know that in side saddle riding you have to choose like a definite color. So blue was for maidens, and black, I guess, was for married women. Is there such a thing for women drivers? No.
Not that I'm aware of. So you have to remember, women drivers didn't really start until much later than they would be driving or be inside saddle. And for a long time, they didn't go into the show ring. It was, they would have been smartly turned out. They would have been driving coaches. And again, we're looking for smartly. You make statement based on how you're dressed and what is happening in that moment in time. So in the 1920s, you would have been in, appropriate colors for the 1920s. And that may have something to do with what that meant at that point in time. Because like red, if you're in some cultures, red means that, you're warding off evil, and, it's good luck and that type of thing. That doesn't hold over quite so much into turnout for us. Women, and actually, if you're looking at all the old turnout guides, until Belle Beach wrote her book in the 1912, there is nothing about women, because women weren't the drivers. And so if you're looking at Felton or some of these other people, there is nothing on women drivers, which is kind of sad. So the driver sitting on the right side of the carriage, that comes from Europe, and it typically is associated with England. But at the same most part, it's a very practical thing. If you are driving, it keeps your whip out of the trees, hopefully. The whip goes across the horses. Because we decided to drive with our left hand holding the reins, that means the right hand holds the whip. And so therefore the whip would go across the horses and such. So, does it come from England? That's the legend. I personally have never seen exact documentation that says that that's what it is. But again, we're coming across with tradition. And but like if you're a single driver, you sit more in the middle, that type of thing. But the coachman's seat, which is usually the driver's seat, is on the right hand side. And so yeah, that answers that. That's the best answer that I have for that one. Part of the reason why we hold our reins in the left hand, most people are right-handed. And if you wanted to have that right hand free to be able to do things like take a drink or eat, or even just be able to move the peasants out of the way with the whip. So the driving with the left hand, I think, comes more naturally with sitting on the right hand side. All right. Any other questions? Okay.
So thank you very much. That's really, really interesting talk. I've been reading recently the book, the Russian memoirs of Nadezhda Durova, the cavalry maiden, famous lady living in the early 19th century. And she is describing one event where she was traveling to the theater in St. Petersburg with some people. And it's so funny, they had a carriage which was meant for two people, and eventually they had guests coming up, and there were eight people who went into this two people carriage. I'm just wondering how it would have been possible. And many of them were ladies as well. And then she describes
Yeah,
yeah, sorry, how they went into this
they talk
theater and
about those type
everyone
of things
saw them
happening
coming
because
out.
you just gather friends.
Yeah.
um,
So,
And there are things like when you go to, let's say, the opera or whatever, they sit on each other's laps and they get, and that's fine as long as everybody knows each other and quite frankly are fairly young. As you get older and particularly as you become wealthier, they tend to be a little bit more formal. But there are certain things that are unique to going to things like the opera. They actually had what they called opera guards on some of the vehicles. If you were going to, take a omnibus or something to, or a Brougham or something, maybe not a Brougham, but a Rockaway, they would put opera guards on the back. So you see how the poles are very long in front of the horse. It's a very traditional look. But if you forget to stop where you're supposed to stop, that pole will run into the carriage in front of you. So they actually put guards there to help reinforce that area on carriages, so that it wouldn't, the pole wouldn't go through and hit the person, injure the person. But yeah, it gets really interesting how today we tend to be very worried about how the vehicle is balanced and the weight and things like that. And they just, when you rely on a horse for transportation, it becomes a whole different thing. And you can pile a bunch of kids on. You can do those type of things. We see it here more with the Amish, but it's not unusual for them to have a lot of kids in a vehicle. Even back here, we had the one with this vehicle here in the middle. That's what, 5 people on that. It gets a little crowded, but they were little people back then, and they just sat on each other's laps and made it work. They definitely were not doing social distancing.
yeah, that's what I was thinking about. Because out of these 8 people, at least 2 of them would have been men. Well, I mean, Nadezhda Durova was dressed as a man. Everybody thought she's a man at that time, serving in the army, and there was her horse.
Yeah.
So,
But how old were they?
well, she was like 25 something, and probably
Yeah.
the other
They're
lady.
still young enough. Yeah, they're still young enough at that age. They're sitting on each other's laps, things like that. Yeah. Some I don't know where the invisible barrier is that you become too old for that, but there is one.
Okay, thank you very much for your commentary. I was just reading this episode and rereading it to my family and thinking about you and your lecture.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, any other questions people have? Um, oh, um, okay.
And it is certainly a lot of information to take in a short period of time. And I think that there are other people that would, look at different ways of how history has affected modern carriage driving. I tend to look at it from the view of the carriage most heavily, and not so much through the fashion. But we have lectures on the fashion and the turnout. We call it turnout here, on proper turnout all the time through the Carriage Association of America. And we do these essentially like what you have, but we do them on Friday nights. And there's a lot to go into the tradition of turnout and why you do what it is. But it comes down to this: whoever owns the vehicle makes the decision of what everything looks like, and money talks.
Okay, thank you for this. And are these lectures also online? Is there a way for people who are interested to join or to?
We do. So the Carriage Association of America is dedicated to the conservation and preservation of horse-drawn vehicles and traditional driving. We have on our on the website caaonline.com a section where you can get into some of the videos. They are available for rent. They're through Vimeo. Other videos are posted on YouTube, and those are linked through our website. We also have special videos that are only available to our members. And the Friday night lectures that we do, they are things that you can either you have them for free if you're a member. If you're not a member, then they're $9.99 and you can join us for the hour.
Okay, thank you very much. If you could just maybe write the web address in the chat if people are interested, they will know where to go.
Sure. Go back to my resource page here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry, it's easier to talk about turnout when you're looking at a horse picture. So,
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. There you go. And well, this is not actually associated with the Carriage Association. If you need to get me or contact me, you can contact me through the CAA. And there's a contact us page. You can drop them a line and they'll, it doesn't come directly to me, but it'll get to me. My email, I'll drop in the chat section just in case somebody needs it. And that's my personal email.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's Gmail, right? Kathleen.
It's not the same one that you and I go back and forth on. This is a different, this one is my personal email. I have them all. I have like 4 emails. It depends on what I'm doing.
Okay. This is really, really interesting, and I'm sure people will email you with further questions. And I would like to thank everybody for joining us here. So yes, it's getting a little bit late here in Latvia as well. Some people might need to go and feed the horses, but yes, I would like to thank you with all my heart, and let's give some virtual applause to Kathleen for being with us tonight. So if people are interested, we have this series of virtual events about all kinds of things in horsey history. You can take a look. They are all published in English on this page. If people are reading in Latvian, we have a Latvian news page. I'm sure not all people are reading in Latvian. And also our sponsored event publishing has a new book which came out just today. Same time with Kathleen's lecture, The Liminal Horse. It's available from the website to order in paperback, in hardcover, in ebook format. And the chapters are on all kinds of different subjects. One of them is about horse harness, and this is written by a harness maker who kind of knows what he's talking about. So also relevant if people want. Take a look. This is really beautiful book and could be a nice Christmas gift if somebody is looking for Christmas gift for horse people, right?
Absolutely.
Yes. So thank you, Kathleen, and yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you for the invite. I appreciate it.
Sorry?
I said, well, thank you for the invite. I appreciate it.
Oh, I really appreciate that you did it, and we had so many things going on, and kind of